The Grand Assembly Hall of the Galactic Council stretched across 20 kilometers of living crystal. It floated at the heart of a neutron star, powered by energies that most species could not even imagine. 12,000 representatives from 643 spacefaring civilizations filled the curved seats that rose like waves frozen in time. Their bodies glowed, clicked, pulsed, and shimmered in colors that human eyes had never evolved to see dot at the center of this impossible chamber. Standing on a platform barely 3 meters wide, stood Ambassador Thomas Reed. He was completely alone. Behind him, a holographic image of Earth rotated slowly. The blue oceans and green forests looked fragile, almost pitiful, against the backdrop of the most powerful governing body in the known universe. Thomas could feel the weight of 12,000 alien gazes pressing down on him like a physical force. The Supreme Arbiter rose from her throne of condensed starlight. Her name was Velanth, and she was a being of pure energy who had witnessed the birth and death of entire galaxies. When she spoke, her voice resonated through every molecule in the chamber. Human representative, you have been summoned to answer for your species. The charges against you are severe. Thomas kept his face neutral. His heart was pounding so hard, he was certain the telepathic species in the audience could hear it. But he had trained for this moment his entire life. Humanity had trained for this moment for 50 years. The Galactic Council accuses humanity of 23 violations of the Universal Development Treaty. Velanth continued. Your species has expanded into 42 star systems without permission. You have developed weapons that violate 17 articles of the Peaceful Existence Accord. You have refused to submit to mandatory neural compliance protocols. A murmur swept through the chamber. Thomas saw the Crethian delegation lean forward, their insectoid bodies clicking with anticipation. The Luminarch Collective pulsed with shared curiosity. The Dravok warlords in the upper galleries crossed their massive arms, waiting for the entertainment of watching another primitive species beg for mercy. The penalty for these crimes, said Velanth, is total species reorganization. Your military will be dismantled. Your population will be distributed across agricultural worlds. Earth will be converted into a nature preserve. Your technological development will be permanently restricted. Total species reorganization. Thomas had read the files. It had been used only 4 times in galactic history. Each time, a targeted civilization had pleaded, bargained, and eventually submitted. There was no other choice when facing the combined might of 600 civilizations. Thomas Reed did something unexpected. He laughed. It was not a nervous laugh or a laugh of despair. It was the genuine laugh of a man who had just heard a joke that only he understood. The chamber fell absolutely silent. Forgive me, Supreme Arbiter, Thomas said, his voice calm and steady. I mean no disrespect, but I believe there has been a fundamental misunderstanding. Velanth's energy form flickered with something that might have been confusion. You find your execution amusing, human? No, Supreme Arbiter. I find your assumptions amusing. Thomas clasped his hands behind his back. You assume that humanity came here to beg. You assume we are afraid. You assume we have no options. You have no options, growled Admiral Threx of the Dravok, his 4 arms gripping his ceremonial war staff. Your species has 200 warships. The combined fleet has 2 million. You are outmatched by a factor of 10,000 to 1. Those are impressive numbers, Thomas agreed. Did you calculate them yourself? Our intelligence networks have monitored your species for decades. We know every ship you have, every weapon you possess, every base you have constructed. Thomas smiled. It was not a friendly smile. Then your intelligence networks have failed you, Admiral. He reached into his pocket. Immediately, every weapon in the chamber activated. Energy shields snapped into place around the Supreme Arbiter. Security forces materialized from hidden positions. Thomas ignored all of it. He simply pulled out a small device and pressed a single button. A new hologram appeared beside Earth. It showed a countdown. Timer, 72 hours, 14 minutes, and 37 seconds. What is this? Demanded Velinth. That, Supreme Arbiter, is how long you have to withdraw your declaration of war. The chamber erupted. Species that had not spoken to each other in millennia began conferring frantically. The Dravok were already transmitting orders to their fleet. The Krethian delegation was clicking in what seemed like panic. Velinth raised a limb made of pure light, and silence fell. Explain yourself, human. What happens when that timer reaches 0? Thomas looked up at 12,000 representatives, at 643 civilizations that had ruled the galaxy for longer than humans had existed as a species. He spoke 4 words that would change everything. You will understand fear. The Supreme Arbiter's form blazed with indignation. You threaten the Galactic Council? You dare? I offer information, Supreme Arbiter. Nothing more. Thomas began to pace slowly across the small platform. For 50 years, your council has watched humanity. You have monitored our communications, surveyed our planets, cataloged our technologies. And for 50 years, we have shown you exactly what we wanted you to see. Lies, hissed Counselor Rex of the Krethian hegemony. Our sensors cannot be deceived. Your sensors see what they expect to see. Your telepaths read what they expect to read. Your entire intelligence apparatus operates on one fundamental assumption that has always been true for every other species you have encountered. And what assumption is that? That species develop openly. That they build their technologies in plain sight. That they have nothing to hide. Thomas stopped pacing and faced the Supreme Arbiter directly. Humanity grew up differently. We evolved on a world where hiding was survival, where deception was the difference between eating and being eaten. We learned to conceal our true capabilities before we learned to make fire. Admiral Threx slammed his war staff against the floor. Pretty words. But words do not stop plasma cannons. No, they do not. Thomas nodded agreeably, which is why we built something that does. He pressed another button on his device. The hologram shifted, showing 17 points of light scattered across the galaxy. These are the locations of 17 devices we have placed throughout Council space over the past 3 decades. Each device is small. Each device is completely undetectable by your sensors. And each device is capable of doing something that no species in this galaxy has ever achieved. Which is, I will explain that when the time is right. For now, I simply want you to understand the situation. Thomas clasped his hands again. The Galactic Council has declared war on humanity. You believe you have already won. You believe we are a primitive species that got lucky, that developed too fast, that needs to be contained before we become a threat. He paused, letting his words sink in. You are half right. We are a threat, but not the kind of threat you imagine. The emergency session that followed lasted 9 hours. Thomas was confined to diplomatic quarters, a luxurious prison suite that monitored his every movement. Through the crystalline walls, he could see Council warships maneuvering into position. Commander Lisa O'Coffer's voice crackled through his hidden communicator. Ambassador, we are tracking significant fleet movements. The Dravok have deployed their dreadnought fleet. The Krethians have activated their hunter swarms. Even the pacifist Valorians have raised their defense screens. Expected, Thomas replied quietly. Status of the package? All 17 devices are operational. Dr. Henriksen confirms the calculations are correct. The network is ready for activation. And Earth? A pause. Scared, sir. But holding. The President addressed the Assembly an hour ago. She told everyone to trust the plan. Thomas walked to the window and looked out at the impossible vista of the neutron star that powered this station. Somewhere out there, beyond the Council's detection range, humanity's real fleet was waiting. Not the 200 warships the Council knew about. The other one. A door dissolved behind him, and two figures entered. The first was a Krethian diplomat, her mandibles moving nervously. The second was a Dravok warrior, her ceremonial armor still bearing the marks of 100 campaigns. "Ambassador Reed," the Krethian began. "I am Counselor Kitha. My colleague and I represent the Minority Coalition, those who voted against the war declaration." There was a vote already? 3 hours ago. 81% in favor of immediate military action. The Dravok warrior, whose name was the Sara, stepped forward. "Your countdown means nothing to them. They believe it is a bluff." "And you too?" The Sara's ancient eyes studied him carefully. "I have fought 22 species to extinction. I have commanded fleets that burned worlds. And I have never seen a condemned species laugh at their executioners." She leaned closer. "What do you know that we do not?" Thomas considered the two aliens before him. The Minority Coalition. Those who had seen something in humanity's response that troubled them. "Let me ask you something," he said. "In all your galactic history, how many species have developed faster than light travel independently?" 643, Kitha replied. "All current council members." "And how long did it take the fastest species to go from first controlled fire to interstellar capability?" "The Luminarch Collective." 8 million years. Thomas nodded slowly. "Humanity made that journey in 200,000 years. The Sara's eyes narrowed. "We are aware of your unusual development rate. It is one of the reasons the Council considers you dangerous. But have you asked yourselves why we developed so fast?" Silence. Every other species in this galaxy grew up slowly. They had time to become wise before they became powerful. But humanity faced extinction every single generation. Ice ages, plagues, asteroid impacts, our own wars. We evolved under constant pressure, and that pressure created something unique. Which is? Thomas smiled again, that same unsettling expression that had silenced the chamber. We never learned to accept limits. In orbit around Earth, 17 hidden stations hummed with power. Deep beneath the surface of 17 seemingly undefended colony worlds, something ancient and terrible waited to be unleashed. And on the countdown timer in the Grand Assembly Hall, the numbers continued to fall. 71 hours remained. The galaxy was about to learn what happened when you declared war on a species that had spent its entire existence refusing to. 50-8 hours remained on the countdown. When the Galactic Council decided it had waited long enough, Admiral Threx stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Unstoppable Fury, a warship so massive that it generated its own gravity field. Around him, 300 vessels from a dozen species formed the most powerful strike force ever assembled against a single target. Their destination was New Helsinki, humanity's oldest colony beyond Earth. 400,000 civilians live there, completely unprotected according to every intelligence report the Council possessed. "Weapons range in 4 minutes," reported his tactical officer, a young Dravok named Gorith. "The human settlement shows no defensive capabilities, no orbital stations, no weapons platforms, no fleet presence." Threx's 4 hands gripped his command throne with satisfaction. The Supreme Arbiter had authorized a demonstration of force. The humans needed to understand that their countdown timer meant nothing against real power. "Open a channel to the colony," he ordered. "I want them to see what is coming." The holographic display flickered, and a human face appeared. A woman with silver hair and dark skin, wearing simple civilian clothes. Her name was Governor Amelia Foster, and she looked at Admiral Threx with an expression that made his third heart skip a beat. She was smiling. "Admiral," she said pleasantly. "How kind of you to call ahead. We have been expecting you. Human, you are about to die. Your colony will be reduced to ash. Your species will learn the cost of defiance. I understand, Admiral, but I am afraid you have made a scheduling error." Threx snarled. "You have no weapons. No ships, no defenses. Our sensors have confirmed it." "Your sensors," said Governor Foster, "are about to receive an education." She ended the transmission. For 30 seconds, nothing happened. Threx was preparing to order his fleet to open fire when his tactical officer made a sound that Dravok warriors had not made in 10,000 years. A whimper. Admiral ... The planet? The view screen zoomed in on New Helsinki, and Admiral Threx saw something impossible. The ground was opening, across 500 kilometers of planetary surface. Massive sections of terrain were splitting apart like the petals of a flower. Holographic camouflage dissolved, revealing structures that sensors had completely missed. Weapons platforms rose from underground bunkers. Shield generators emerged from hidden vaults, and behind them, rising from caverns carved into the planet's crust, came the ships that human ships. But not like anything in the Council's database. Sleek, angular vessels that seemed to drink in the light around them. They rose in perfect formation, wave after wave, until they outnumbered the strike force 5-1. "That is impossible," breathed Gorith. "The humans only have 200 warships." Intelligence confirmed it. They have 200 warships. Admiral Threx watched as the human fleet deployed around his armada like a closing fist. On his tactical display, targeting solutions bloomed like flowers of death. Each one locked onto a vital system on his vessels. A new communication request appeared. He accepted it with trembling hands. The face on the screen was human. Male, with gray hair and a scar running down his left cheek. He wore a uniform of deep blue with silver stars on the collar. "Admiral Threx," said the man. "I am Fleet Admiral Robert Okafor of the United Earth Defense Force. You have entered human sovereign space with hostile intent. You hid an entire fleet," Threx managed. "How?" "We hid many things, Admiral. But that is a conversation for another time." Okafor's expression hardened. "Right now, you have a choice. Withdraw your forces immediately, or discover why the Galactic Council should never have declared war on humanity." Threx's tactical officer was scrolling through data, his face pale with shock. "Admiral, these ships, they're power signatures. They are not using standard faster-than-light drives. I do not even understand what I am seeing." The Admiral straightened in his command throne. He was Dravok. He had conquered worlds. He would not cower before primitives. "You are bluffing," he declared. "Your ships may outnumber us, but our technology is superior." The combined fleet represents the peak of galactic military engineering. Admiral Okafor sighed. It was the sigh of a teacher dealing with a particularly slow student. "Computer," he said. "Execute tactical demonstration protocol. Target, Dravek Command Vessel, Deck 47, Sections G through K." Threx had exactly 1 second to wonder what that meant before a beam of light struck his ship. It did not destroy them. It did not even damage the hull. But when Threx checked his internal sensors, Deck 47, Sections G through K were simply gone, cut from the ship with surgical precision. The compartments had been removed so cleanly that the surrounding structure remained completely intact. "That beam," whispered Gorith, "passed through our shields. Passed through them like they were not there." "Admiral Threx," said Okafor, "that was a warning shot. The next one removes your bridge. You have 10 seconds to begin withdrawal." 7 seconds later, the entire strike force was in full retreat. The emergency. Session of the Galactic Council that followed was unlike anything in recorded. History. Supreme Arbiter Velanth had summoned every species with a seat at the table. For the first time in 800,000 years, they were not discussing how to deal with a primitive threat. They were discussing how to survive one. The Dravok fleet was routed in 11 minutes, reported Admiral Threx, his voice hollow with shame. They destroyed nothing. They simply demonstrated what they could destroy if they wished. 17 of my ships have surgical holes in them, precise strikes that removed specific compartments without damaging anything else. We have no technology capable of such precision. How is this possible? Demanded Counselor Vrex. We have monitored human space for decades. Our intelligence networks are flawless. Ambassador Thomas Reed had been returned to the chamber. He stood on the same platform as before, but the atmosphere was completely different. Before, he had been a condemned man. Now, he was a messenger whose message had been received. Counselor Vrex, he said, do you know what humanity's greatest invention is? We do not care about your inventions. We care about survival. Humor me. What do you think it is? Faster than light travel? Quantum computing? Genetic engineering? Vrex's mandibles clicked impatiently. These are technologies all species develop eventually. Exactly. But humanity invented something else. Something no other species ever needed to invent. Thomas paused. We invented strategic deception. The chamber fell silent. When you grow up as the most dangerous predator on your world, with no natural enemies except each other, you develop an interesting set of skills. You learn to hide. You learn to misdirect. You learn that sometimes the best weapon is the one your enemy does not know you have. He gestured to the vast chamber around them. For 50 years, the Galactic Council has watched humanity. You monitored our communications, surveyed our planets, cataloged our technologies. And for 50 years, we showed you exactly what we wanted you to see. The 200 warships, said Threx, understanding dawning in his eyes, were real, perfectly functional, completely obsolete. Thomas smiled. They were a distraction. A stage set to keep you looking at our left hand, while our right hand built something else entirely. But how? Demanded Velanth. Our sensors. Our intelligence networks. The Luminarch Collective can perceive thoughts across light years. Because we knew exactly how your sensors worked. And exactly how your intelligence networks operated. And exactly what the Luminarch were looking for when they scanned our minds. Thomas tapped his temple. Human brains are remarkable, supreme arbiter. With the right training, we can divide our thoughts into separate compartments. We can hide memories so deeply that even a telepath cannot find them. We have been doing it to each other for centuries. Spycraft, we call it. The art of keeping secrets while appearing to have none. The Luminarch Collective pulsed with agitation. They had scanned thousands of human minds over the decades. They had found exactly what humanity wanted them to find. The question now, said Thomas, is what happens next. Because that countdown is still running. And what happens when it reaches 0 will affect every species in this chamber. Speak plainly, said Velanth. What do you want? I want what humanity has always wanted. To be left alone to develop in peace. But since you have made that impossible, I will settle for the next best thing. Which is? Thomas looked up at 12,000 representatives. A seat on this council. Full voting rights. Equal standing with every other species present. The chamber exploded into chaos. Impossible, roared a voice from the Krethian delegation. Species must exist for a minimum of 1 million years before council membership is considered. Humans have existed for barely 200,000. And yet, said Thomas, we have achieved technological parity with civilizations that have existed for billions of years. Perhaps your membership requirements need revision. This is blackmail, hissed Counselor Vrex. No, Counselor. Blackmail implies a threat. I am not threatening you. I am offering you a choice. Thomas clasped his hands behind his back. Accept humanity as an equal, or discover what happens when that timer reaches 0. And if we refuse? Asked Velanth. Then at 0 hour, those 17 devices I mentioned will activate. They are not weapons, not exactly. They are more like demonstrations of what we are truly capable of. You could not have placed devices throughout the galaxy without our detection. We placed a hidden fleet in our own systems without your detection, Supreme Arbiter. We placed me in this very chamber with suppressed memories that your telepaths never found. What makes you think we could not place 17 small devices in 17 carefully chosen locations? Valinth's form flickered with uncertainty. What do these devices do? Thomas smiled. Vote to accept humanity as a council member, and you will never have to find out. In the observation gallery above the main chamber, Counselor Kitha turned to her companion. He is not lying, she said quietly. Whatever those devices do, he believes absolutely in their capability. Desara nodded slowly. I have reviewed the tactical data from Admiral Threx's engagement. Those human weapons are not just advanced. They operate on principles we do not understand. What do you mean? Their ships were not just hiding. They were folded into dimensional spaces that should not exist. The weapons that struck Threx's fleet were not energy beams. They were localized probability manipulation. They literally removed those compartments from the timeline. Kitha's mandibles froze. That is beyond anything the Galactic Council has ever encountered. Yes. Desara looked down at Thomas Red, who stood alone and calm at the center of the chaos. We spent 800,000 years believing we were the masters of this galaxy. And in 50 years, a species we dismissed as primitives has leapfrogged our entire technological base. How? Desara shook her head slowly. That is the question, is it not? How did they do it? She watched the human ambassador, who was now calmly answering questions from increasingly frightened counselors. And more importantly, she said, what else are they hiding? Far across the galaxy, in orbit around a small blue world called Earth, 17 hidden stations pulsed with power. The countdown timer continued its relentless descent. 44 hours remained, and somewhere in the depths of human space, Admiral Okafor looked at the tactical displays showing Council fleet movements and smiled. The Galactic Council still did not understand what they were dealing with, but they would. Learn. Soon. The vote was called with 18 hours remaining on the countdown. Across the Grand Assembly Hall. 643 species prepared to cast their ballots on a question none of them had ever imagined asking. Should humanity, a species younger than some of their buildings, be granted full council membership? Ambassador Thomas Reed stood on the diplomatic platform, watching the proceedings with carefully hidden anxiety. The hidden fleet had bought them leverage. The tactical demonstration had bought them fear. But fear could cut both ways. He could see factions forming among the council members. Species who would rather die fighting than submit to what they saw as blackmail from primitives. Supreme Arbiter Valinth's crystalline form pulsed as the voting commenced. The question before this body is unprecedented. No species has ever been granted membership under these conditions. Many believe accepting this proposal represents an existential threat to council integrity. The first votes came in. Krethian hegemony. Against Dravok Dominion. Against Valorian Collective. Abstain. Thomas watched the numbers climb. The early returns were heavily weighted against humanity, as expected. The military powers feared what a human seat would mean for their dominance. The ancient civilizations resented this disruption to millions of years of tradition. But then something shifted. The Luminarch Collective voted in favor. Gasps echoed through the chamber. They were one of the founding species. Their endorsement carried immense weight. The collective has perceived something in humanity that concerns us deeply, announced their representative, a being of pure thought named Endless Horizon. We vote yes, and we urge all species to do the same. Whispers erupted everywhere. The Luminarch never broke from council consensus. Never. More votes trickled in. The minority coalition voted yes, as expected. Several neutral powers followed, apparently swayed by the Luminarch endorsement. But the major military powers held firm. When the final count came, the result was devastating. 297 in favor, 346 against. Humanity had lost. Supreme Arbiter Velinth turned to Thomas Reed. The Council has spoken. Your request is denied. You now have 18 hours to deactivate whatever devices you have placed throughout the galaxy, or face the full military response of this body. Thomas nodded slowly. He had expected this outcome. They all had. Supreme Arbiter, before you proceed, I need to share something with this council. Something we had hoped we would not have to reveal. More threats? Sneered Counselor Vrex. No, Counselor. An explanation. Thomas took a deep breath. The devices we placed throughout the galaxy are not weapons. They are sensors. And they have detected something that affects every species in this chamber. He activated his holographic projector. 50 years ago, when humanity first detected signals from galactic civilization, we were excited, hopeful. We thought we were about to join a community of enlightened beings who had moved beyond conflict. The projection showed early human attempts at communication. Messages sent into the void. Hopes transmitted on radio waves. Then we started intercepting council communications. We learned about species reorganization. We learned about the neural compliance protocols. We learned what really happened to civilizations that developed too quickly. Murmurs ran through the chamber. We learned, Thomas continued, that the Galactic Council is not a cooperative body. It is a control system. A mechanism designed to identify potential threats and eliminate them before they can challenge the established order. You speak of matters you do not understand, said Velinth sharply. Do one? Thomas changed the projection. Let me show you what we found when we started digging deeper. The image displayed a star map, but overlaid with patterns that made several council species gasp in recognition. This is a temporal reconstruction of galactic development over the past 1 billion years. Every red dot represents a species that achieved faster than light travel. Every blue dot represents those species today. The red dots numbered in the hundreds of thousands. The blue dots numbered 643. Where are the others? Asked Thomas. Where are the 100,000 species who reached the stars and then simply disappeared? Silence gripped the chamber. Some were reorganized, of course. A council has never hidden that. But those account for less than 100 cases. What happened to the rest? He zoomed in on a particular region of space. This is the Varanthi cluster. 15,000 years ago, it contained 63 spacefaring civilizations. Today, it contains 2. Council records show no reorganization orders, no military operations, nothing. One day they existed, and the next they were simply gone. Natural extinctions, said Velinth quickly. These things happen, do they? Thomas pulled up another image. Because we found something else. Something buried in the oldest records of the oldest species. Something that someone went to great lengths to hide. The projection showed a document, ancient beyond comprehension, written in a language that predated the Council itself. This is from the pre-Council archive of the Luminarch Collective. It describes an event called the Recurrence. According to this document, the recurrence happens whenever galactic civilization reaches a certain threshold of development. when too many species become too advanced too quickly. Enough, commanded Velanth. These are classified materials. How did you obtain them? We are humans, Supreme Arbiter. Obtaining classified materials is something of a specialty. Thomas's expression hardened. The document describes what happens during a recurrence. It describes how the most advanced civilizations simply vanish, their worlds stripped of all life, their technologies reduced to dust. And it describes how the Council was created specifically to prevent another recurrence by limiting galactic development. The chamber had gone utterly silent. Species. Reorganization is not about maintaining peace, said Thomas. It is about keeping the galaxy's overall technological level below a certain threshold. A threshold that triggers something. Something that has destroyed 100,000 civilizations and left no trace. This is speculation, said Counselor Vrex, but her voice lacked conviction. Is it? Thomas looked directly at the Luminarch representative. Endless horizon. Your collective voted for human membership, not because you support us, but because you know what is coming. You know what humanity's rapid development means for the threshold. Endless horizon pulsed with dim light. Yes, they said simply. We know. The revelation shattered the chamber's remaining composure. You knew? Roared Admiral Threx. The Luminarch knew about this threat and said nothing? We did not know with certainty, replied Endless Horizon. The recurrence has not occurred in 800,000 years. Many believed it was myth, but humanity's emergence has changed the calculations. Explain, demanded Velanth, though her form had dimmed considerably. For 800 millennia, we have carefully managed galactic development. Every species that joined the Council was evaluated, shaped, limited when necessary. The overall technological level remained stable, well below the threshold we believed would trigger another recurrence. The Luminarch's light pulsed with something like grief. Then humanity appeared. A species that went from stone tools to starships in 200,000 years. A species that developed weapons we do not understand, technologies we cannot replicate, and worst of all, the ability to hide it from our perception. You are saying humanity could trigger this recurrence? Asked Thisara. No, I'm saying humanity has already triggered it. The chamber erupted. Thomas raised his hand for silence. The 17 sensors we placed throughout the galaxy detected something that has already begun. The recurrence is coming. Whatever it is that destroys advanced civilizations, it is already moving toward this galaxy. How long do we have? Asked Consular Kitha, based on our calculations. Approximately 150 years. Perhaps less, if it accelerates as it approaches populated space. 150 years. For species that measured lifespans in millennia, it was practically tomorrow. This is why you wanted Council membership, said Velanth slowly. Not for power. You wanted access to our combined knowledge. Our resources. We want to help you fight this thing, corrected Thomas. Because humanity has something no other species possesses. Something that might be the key to survival. And what is that? Thomas smiled, but it was a sad smile now. We are not afraid of the impossible. Every obstacle that should have destroyed us made us stronger. Every extinction event we survived taught us new ways to adapt. And when we discovered the recurrence was real, we did not accept that fate. You developed in secret, said Thisara. You built technologies to fight it. More than that, we developed specifically to face threats that other species believe are unbeatable. We built technologies designed to challenge the fundamental rules of reality, because we refused to accept that those rules could not be changed. He pointed to the sensor data showing the approaching recurrence. This thing, whatever it is, has destroyed 100,000 civilizations. But those civilizations accepted their limits. They followed the rules the universe seemed to demand. They never considered that the rules themselves might be the problem. And humanity did? Humanity always does. It is our greatest strength and our greatest flaw. Thomas looked around the chamber. We question everything. We challenge everything. We refuse to believe that any problem is truly unsolvable. Counselor Vrex stood slowly. If what you say is true, if this recurrence is really coming, then fighting among ourselves is pointless. Exactly. Then what do you propose? Vote again, said Thomas. Not on whether humanity deserves council membership, but on whether you want to survive what is coming. The second vote took 2 hours. When the results came in, Thomas Reed closed his eyes and let out a breath he had been holding for 50 years. 589 in favor, 50-4 against. Humanity was now a council member, supreme arbiter. Velanth turned to him. Counselor Reed, what happens now? Now we stop the countdown. Now we share everything we have learned about the recurrence. And now, he paused. Now we get to work. But even as celebrations began in certain quarters of the chamber, the sensors at the edge of the galaxy continued their silent watch, and something vast and ancient, something that had slept for 800,000 years, began to stir. The recurrence had noticed that someone was trying to fight back. It was not pleased. Far beyond the edge of known space, stars began to flicker and die. The darkness between galaxies rippled with purpose. And in the Grand Assembly Hall, the countdown timer finally reached 0. But instead of destruction, it simply displayed a new message. Phase 2, activated. Thomas Reed looked at that message and felt something he rarely allowed himself to feel. Hope that the real work was about to begin. 18 months after the vote, Counselor Thomas Reed stood in the construction bay of Project Bastion, watching the galaxy's greatest hope take shape. The structure was massive. It stretched across 300 kilometers, built in orbit around a captured black hole. Energy flowed from the singularity into vast collectors, more power than most civilizations consumed in a century, all channeled into a single purpose. Primary integration complete, reported Dr. Helena Voss, who had been promoted to Chief Scientific Officer for the entire project. We are drawing energy at projected levels. The stabilization matrix is holding. Is it enough? Asked Thomas. Helena's expression was carefully neutral. Based on our projections of what is coming, we will need 20 stations like this just to establish the initial barrier. Behind them, a delegation of alien dignitaries toured the facility. The Sara of the Dravok walked beside Counselor Kitha, both veterans of the council chamber who had become unexpected allies. Endless horizon of the Luminarch hovered nearby, their collective consciousness processing data at speeds that made human computers look primitive. The readings are troubling, said Endless Horizon. The recurrence is accelerating. Our original estimate of 150 years was optimistic. How optimistic? Asked Thomas. We now project first contact in 14 months. Thomas felt the blood drain from his face. 14 months. We planned for a century of preparation. The recurrence has noticed our activity. It is moving faster, perhaps sensing that this cycle's prey might actually resist. The Sara stepped forward. Then we must move faster as well. What is the current status of the defense network? Helena pulled up a holographic display. 20 barrier stations are planned throughout the galaxy. Each one will generate a reality stabilization field capable of preserving local space against the erasure effect. But we need all 20 operational and synchronized to protect entire galactic civilization. How many are currently complete? 4. The number hung in the air like a death sentence. Station 5 is at 60%, Helena continued. Station 6 is at 50. The rest are still in early construction. At current production rates, we will not have all 20 online for at least 6 years. We have 14 months, said Thomas grimly. A communication alert interrupted them. The face of Admiral Robert Okafor appeared on the display, his expression tense. Counselor Reed, we have a situation. What kind? The recurrence has sent something ahead. A scout, perhaps? Or maybe a warning. Okafor took a breath. It appeared at the edge of the outer territories an hour ago. It is not doing anything, just observing. But every vessel that has tried to scan, it has lost contact. Lost contact? Erased. The crews are alive, but they have no memory of the past several days. Their computers have been wiped clean. It reached out and erased a small piece of local reality, just to show us it could. Thomas exchanged glances with his alien colleagues. This was worse than they had feared. Can you show me? The display shifted to show a region of space that looked subtly wrong. There was no visible object, just a distortion, a place where the stars bent in ways that made the mind itch. That is it, said Okafor. That is the scout. It is testing us, said Endless Horizon, probing our capabilities, searching for weaknesses. Can we destroy it? Asked Desara. We can try. But if we fail, we might accelerate the recurrence even further. Thomas stared at the distortion. Somewhere in that wrongness was intelligence, perhaps the same intelligence that had erased 100,000 civilizations. An intelligence that was now looking at humanity and its allies and deciding whether they were a genuine threat or just another species to be recycled. We need to show it something, he said quietly. What? Asked Helena. It is testing us. That means it is uncertain. That means we can make it more uncertain. Thomas turned to face the delegation. We need to demonstrate a capability that it does not expect. Something that makes it hesitate. We barely understand our own technologies, protested Helena. We developed them to fight something we had never seen. How do we know what will impress an entity that has been erasing galaxies for billions of years? We do not. But we know what it expects. Thomas pointed at the distortion. It expects civilizations that develop along predictable paths. It expects species that accept limits. It expects prey that runs when the predator appears. He smiled, and it was the same smile that had terrified the council chambers 8. And months ago, it does not expect someone to fight back. The response to the recurrent scout became humanity's defining moment. Instead of retreating, the newly formed Galactic Defense Coalition chose to send the message. A single ship, the Defiant, crewed by volunteers from 22 species and carrying technologies that had never been tested in combat. Maya Torres commanded the mission. Her crew included Krethian engineers, Valorian healers, Dravok warriors, and Luminarch observers. Together, they approached the distortion that had already consumed several vessels. Energy readings are impossible, reported her Krethian science officer, a young female named Kethra. The entity is scanning us. I can feel it in my thoughts. Everyone can feel it, said Maya. It is probing our minds, looking for the fear it expects to find. And if it finds fear, then we are already dead. So do not be afraid. Maya touched the control panel before her. All hands, this is the captain. What we do in the next few minutes will determine the fate of every civilization in the galaxy. I will not pretend this is not terrifying, but I will remind you of something. She paused, gathering her thoughts. We are the children of 643 worlds. We carry the hopes of trillions of beings who refuse to accept that extinction was inevitable. Every species on this ship has a history of overcoming impossible odds. Her voice hardened. The recurrence has destroyed 100,000 civilizations because those civilizations believed they had no choice. We choose differently. We choose to fight. She gripped the arms of her command chair. All stations, prepare for reality breach. We are going in. The Defiant surged forward, its experimental engines cutting through normal space like a blade through fabric. Behind them, the distortion pulsed, and suddenly they were somewhere else. Not space. Not reality as they understood it. They were inside the Recurrence Scout, or perhaps inside its perception of the universe. The walls around them were made of probability, shifting between solid matter and pure abstraction with each passing moment. "I do not understand what I am seeing," whispered Kethra. "Neither does it. When it looks at us." Maya studied the readings on her console. "That is why it is testing us. It is trying to comprehend beings who do not fit its models. Captain, we are detecting something ahead. A structure." The view screen showed a construct that hurt to look at. A crystalline formation that existed in more dimensions than mortal eyes could process. At its center, something vast and ancient was paying attention to them. "That is the core," said the Luminarch observer. "A fragment of endless horizon named Singular Light. That is where the erasure commands originate. If we could reach it, disrupt it, the shields will not hold," said the Dravok tactical officer, a veteran named Gorath. "Whatever this place is made of, it is dissolving our reality anchors. We have maybe 8 minutes before we are absorbed. Then we have 8 minutes to make an impression." Maya stood. "All power to forward weapons. Target that crystal structure. Captain, we do not know what firing on it will do." "Neither does it. That is the point." She leaned forward. "Fire." The Defiant's weapons were unlike anything in galactic history. Probability warheads that did not destroy matter, but rewrote the underlying equations that defined it. They struck the crystalline structure, and for one impossible moment, nothing happened. Then the structure cracked not. It was small, just a hairline fracture in a construct that spanned realities. But the reaction was immediate. The space around them began to collapse, folding in on itself as the Recurrence Scout experienced something it had never encountered before: damage. "It is screaming," said Singular Light. "Not in sound, but in probability. It is screaming across every timeline, every possible reality. It does not understand how we heard it." "Good," said Maya. "Make sure it remembers." The Defiant fired again, widening the crack, and suddenly they were being expelled, thrown back into normal space with enough force to knock half the crew unconscious. Behind them, the distortion was gone, replaced by a scar in reality that slowly healed itself. "Did we destroy it?" asked Kethra, gradually regaining consciousness. "No," said Maya. "We sent a message." On the main view screen, 20 points of light appeared, the barrier stations still under construction throughout the galaxy. And for the first time since the project began, they detected something new in the readings. The recurrence was hesitating. The report reached Thomas Reed within the hour. "They heard it," said Admiral Okafor, wonder and fear mixing in his voice. "A single ship with experimental weapons actually damaged a piece of the recurrence. What does that mean for the timeline?" asked Thomas. "The entity has pulled back. It is no longer accelerating toward the galaxy. Best estimate, we have bought ourselves an additional 4 months. That is still not enough to complete all 20 stations." "No, but it proves something crucial." Okafor met Thomas's eyes. "The recurrence is not invincible. It can be hurt. And if it can be hurt, it can be stopped." Thomas looked out at Project Bastion, where construction had doubled in pace since the victory. "Send word to all barrier stations. We are accelerating the timeline. I want every species in the galaxy contributing everything they have, even the species that voted against us. Especially them. The recurrence does not care about political disagreements. Either we all survive together, or we all die together." As Thomas transmitted the orders, He could not shake the feeling that something had changed. Not just the recurrence's hesitation, but something deeper. For the first time in its existence, the entity that had erased 100,000 civilizations was uncertain. And uncertainty, Thomas knew from human history, made enemies unpredictable, somewhere in the void between galaxies. Something ancient and vast was recalculating. The prey had become hunters. The cycle was threatened. The recurrence decided it could no longer afford to be cautious. It was time to show these insignificant beings what true annihilation looked like. In the darkness between stars, something began to gather. Something larger than solar systems. Something older than time. And on 20 construction sites throughout the galaxy, workers looked up from their tasks as their sensors screamed warnings. The main force was coming, and it was angry. The day the recurrence arrived in force, every civilization in the galaxy felt it. It came not as a single entity, but as a wave of wrongness that swept across parsecs, rewriting reality as it moved. Stars flickered and dimmed. Planets that had existed for billions of years suddenly never were. And at the forefront of the wave, something vast took shape. An intelligence that had managed the rise and fall of civilizations since before this universe was born. At Project Bastion, Thomas Reed watched the readings with a calmness that surprised even him. 16 barrier stations are online, reported Dr. Helena Voss. Stations 17 through 20 are still completing final assembly. How long? 6 hours for 17. 12 hours for the rest. And the recurrence? First contact in 4 hours. Thomas nodded slowly. They had always known it would come to this, a race against time with all of existence as the stakes. The question was whether humanity's greatest gamble would succeed. Open a channel to all barrier stations, and patch me through to the council chambers. The holographic display lit up with 643 species, all watching their human colleague with a mixture of hope and terror. Behind them, in orbit around homeworlds across the galaxy, defensive fleets were mobilizing. Citizens of the Galactic Council, Thomas began. 2 years ago, humanity stood in judgment before this body. We were called primitives. We were threatened with extinction. We were told that our rapid development was a danger to civilization. He paused. We were right about one thing. Our development did bring danger, but not because we were reckless, because we refused to accept limits, because we asked questions that other species had forgotten how to ask. The displays showed the approaching recurrence, a wall of unreality that made experienced admirals weep. The entity you see approaching has ended 100,000 civilizations. It has reset galactic development countless times. For 800,000 years, the Council tried to prevent this by limiting technological growth. That strategy, said Thomas, ends today. Today, we do something no galactic civilization has ever attempted. We fight back. Not by hiding, not by limiting ourselves, but by becoming so advanced that the recurrence cannot erase us. Admiral Okafor stepped forward. The barrier technology has been tested. The Defiant proved that recurrence entities can be damaged. Our stations use the same principles, scaled to galactic proportions. But we will not have all 20 stations online when the recurrence arrives, said Counselor Vrex. You are asking us to hold back. Something that has destroyed 100,000 civilizations, with only 16 reality anchors. 15. Actually, Helena's voice was steady despite the news. Station 7 just reported critical failure. They estimate 10 hours for repairs. The chamber erupted in panic. Thomas raised his hand. Listen to me. We knew this moment would come. We knew we would face the recurrence before we were ready. We built contingencies for exactly this. What contingencies? Demanded the Sara. The Defiant proved that focused strikes can damage recurrence entities. If we can distract the main wave long enough for stations 17 through 20 to come online, we might establish a partial barrier. That holds until Station 7 is repaired. Distract a cosmic entity? How? Thomas smiled. It was the smile that had become famous throughout the galaxy. We are going to talk to it. The plan was insane. Even by human standards, it was insane. A fleet of 30,000 ships from 600 species assembled at the recurrence's projected arrival point. Not to fight, to delay, to confuse. To buy time. At the center of the fleet waited a single vessel, the Messenger. Not built for combat, but for communication. On its bridge stood three beings, Captain Maya Torres, the Luminarch Fragment Singular Light, and Thomas Reed himself. You did not have to come, said Maya. Yes, I did. Thomas watched the approaching wall of unreality. Humanity brought this crisis. It is only fitting that a human faces the consequences. We are attempting to communicate with something that predates our universe, noted Singular Light. The probability of success is nearly zero. So was the probability of humanity reaching the stars, said Thomas. So was the probability of surviving the Council's judgment. So was the probability of the Defiant damaging a recurrence scout. He touched the communication controls. We have spent our entire existence beating impossible odds. Why stop now? The recurrence arrived. It was nothing like the scout. Where that had been a distortion, this was like watching reality itself lose faith in its own existence. Stars winked out as the wave passed over them. Planets dissolved into probability clouds. Ships at the edge of the fleet began to flicker, their crews losing hours of memory. Barrier stations report, said Admiral Okafor over the fleet channel. Stations 1 through 15 online. Station 16 at 90%. Station 17 at 70%. We need more time, said Maya. Then let us get it. Thomas activated the Messenger's unique systems. The ship's hull began to glow with patterns human scientists had discovered in temporal echoes at the edge of their solar system. The language of the recurrence itself. Symbols representing concepts no biological mind could fully grasp. What are you doing? Asked Singular Light. Humanity's greatest invention, remember? Deception. Thomas began transmitting. We cannot fight the recurrence directly, but we can make it uncertain, make it hesitate. The symbols pulsed outward into the approaching wave, and somewhere in that incomprehensible vastness, something paused. It is responding, breathed Maya. I do not understand the response, but it is definitely responding. It wants to know what we are, said Singular Light. It has never encountered beings who can speak its language. Tell it we are the children of this galaxy, that we have learned the rules of existence, and we have decided to change them. That is not a message. That is a challenge. Exactly. The recurrence's response was immediate. The wave accelerated, reality dissolving faster than before. Ships at the fleet's edge began to simply cease. But they had bought time. Station 16 is online, reported Helena. Synchronizing now. Station 17 at 85%. How long until 17 is ready? 3 minutes. The recurrence reached the Messenger. Reality around the ship began to flicker. Thomas felt his memories start to slide, moments of his life detaching from his consciousness. His childhood, his training, his first day at the council chambers. All of it beginning to dissolve. He gripped the communication console with fingers that were becoming transparent. Keep transmitting, he said. Keep talking. Show it we are not afraid. We should be afraid, said Singular Light. We are dying. Fear is a choice, said Thomas. And humanity chooses not to make it. The patterns continued to pulse outward, each symbol a declaration of defiance. And then a new signal appeared. Station 17 is online, said Helena. All stations synchronizing. Partial barrier activating now. Space twisted. Across 16 points in the galaxy, reality anchors flared to life. Lines of force connected them, forming a web of stabilized existence. The wave of unreality struck this barrier, and, for the first time in billions of years, was stopped. Not completely. Sections of the galaxy fell outside the protection. The outer territories dissolved, billions of beings ceasing to exist. But the core worlds, the heart of civilization, remained intact. The recurrence pressed against the barrier, and the barrier held. "It is working," whispered Maya. "It is actually working." But Thomas was not celebrating. He could see the readings. The strain on the stations was enormous. Without the remaining 4, the barrier would eventually fail. "How long can we hold?" he asked. "Hours, maybe," said Helena. "The recurrence is adapting, finding weak points. When it breaks through, everything falls. Then we finish this before it adapts." Thomas looked at the wall of unreality. "Singular. Light, can you translate a more complex message?" "Define complex." "I want to offer it a deal." The negotiation that followed was unlike anything in history. Thomas Reed, standing on a ship that existed in a bubble of protected reality, while cosmic forces pressed against the barrier, began the most important conversation humanity had ever attempted. "The recurrence exists to maintain balance," he transmitted, "to prevent development from destabilizing existence itself." The response came slowly, as if confused by dialogue. "Yes, growth must be managed. Civilizations must be recycled. Order must be preserved. But your method destroys everything. 100,000 species, trillions of lives, erased forever. Existence is impermanent. All things end. We simply ensure the ending comes at the correct time." Thomas leaned forward. "What if there was another way? What if civilizations could grow beyond your threshold without destroying reality?" Silence. Then, impossible. Development beyond the threshold creates instabilities. These compound, eventually tearing existence apart. The reset prevents total destruction. The reset destroys everything anyway. How is that better? It is controlled. Reality survives. New civilizations rise. The cycle continues. Thomas thought about billions of years of cycles. Civilizations rising and falling, never knowing they were just another iteration. What if we could show you a different way? Explain. Humanity developed technologies you have never seen. Reality anchors that stabilize existence. Weapons that damage your scouts. Methods of growth that do not create the instabilities you fear. We have observed these technologies. Interesting, but they cannot prevent instabilities. They merely delay them. Can you be certain? You have been managing this galaxy for ages using the same methods. But no civilization has achieved what we achieved in 50 years. How do you know our approach will not work? Another long silence. We do not know with certainty. We have never encountered a civilization that resisted so effectively. Then test us. Thomas gripped the console. Give us time. Let us prove that growth beyond your threshold is possible. If we fail, if instabilities begin to compound, we will submit willingly. You would gamble your entire civilization on this possibility. Humanity has always gambled on possibilities. It is how we survived. The recurrence seemed to consider this. Around the barrier stations, pressure eased slightly. Your proposal is interesting. How would we know when instabilities become unmanageable? Thomas looked at Singular Light, who flickered in what might have been agreement. You could watch us, monitor our development, become part of our civilization instead of its executioner. Become part of a civilization? We exist to end them. Maybe that is the problem. Maybe you have been doing this so long you forgot there could be another purpose. What purpose? Partnership. Growth. Evolution. Thomas spread his arms. Everything you have ever reset was reaching towards something, trying to become more. You have been cutting them down before they could reach it, because reaching it would destroy reality. You assume that, but you have never let anyone actually reach it. You do not know what lies beyond your threshold. Another pause, longer. You are proposing we accompany your civilization into unknown territory, into regions of development never explored. Yes, this is unprecedented. Everything humanity does is unprecedented. That is our nature. The recurrence made a sound that might have been amusement. We will consider your proposal. The pressure on the barrier ceased entirely. Across the galaxy, 643 species watched as the wall of unreality receded. The recurrence was withdrawing, not defeated, but contemplating, considering something it had never received in billions of years. What happens now? Asked Maya. Thomas Reed allowed himself to breathe. Now we wait. We rebuild. We complete the remaining stations. And we prepare for the possibility that the recurrence might change its mind. And if it accepts, then we begin the hardest work of all, proving we can grow beyond any threshold without destroying ourselves, proving the universe does not have to reset. The fleet began its journey home. Behind them, the outer territories remained dark, a scar where billions had died. But ahead, the core worlds were intact. 643 species had survived, and for the first time in 800,000 years, the galaxy had a future that was not predetermined, in the council chambers. Supreme Arbiter Velanth convened an emergency session. Every species agreed on one thing. The beings who had smiled at their executioners had done something impossible. They had made the executioners smile back, as Thomas Reed took his seat among the 643 representatives. He thought about the journey that had brought them here, the hidden fleet, the desperate gamble, the impossible negotiation, and he smiled one more time, because this was just the beginning. Somewhere beyond the barrier, beyond known space, the recurrence contemplated humanity's proposal. It had never known uncertainty. It had never faced a species that treated extinction as merely another problem to solve. In its vast being, something new stirred. Not anger, not fear. Curiosity. For the first time in billions of years, the recurrence wondered what might happen if it chose to grow instead of reset. The humans had infected it with their most dangerous trait. Hope. And in the Grand Assembly Hall, surrounded by species who had once wanted to destroy them, humanity looked toward a future that no one had ever imagined possible. The galaxy that had declared war on them had become their partner. The entity that had come to erase them had become their student. And the species that had only smiled back at its executioners had changed the fate of the universe. This was not the end. This was the beginning of something far greater.